Good morning, Hev. Lovely to see you.
Hello, and thank you so much for having me, Chris. It's great to be, I suppose, in one way on the other side of the interviewing EP fence. So, and it's always good to talk to you and to talk to other leaders as part of this this campaign that you're running. So, thanks for running it too.
So let's start with your role, shall we?
Yes, I own a business, and I'm the managing director of a business called Pendulum Partnership. And we've got two divisions, basically. One is a consultancy division that provides change management services, particularly in the areas of people-based change. But moreover, where I'm doing a lot more work these days is in my events and coaching division, where I teach people mindset transformation, all about how to become limitless as leaders. And in fact, my group that I run that hosts the events is called Limitless Leaders. So that's what I do. I sort of see myself as someone all about mindset and what I enjoy to do, what I enjoy doing.
And who's inspired you? If you look back in your life as leadership, who's inspired you, political, whether historic, whether it's real life?
Yes, and I think that question's been slightly, I mean, I've obviously probably, like many people, been really reflecting on that this past year or so. And I've got two, so I'm probably just going to snapshot on one. I think the first that has just come to me so often this past year or so is Martin Luther King. And I think that is someone that we can sort of really all relate to as for me, as it relates to my journey. It's just that principle of I have a dream. And the fact that it was a dream filled with so much passion. And during the past sort of year or so of the pandemic, where like everybody, I've had professionally and personally my own ups and downs, my own challenges, and really have found a whole new toolkit for my mindset, really by grounding myself back in the dream that I've got and how I want to sort of create my little bit of change and legacy in the world. He's a leader that really stands head and shoulders above, for me, and many others. And it's really to do with his words and his advocacy for that passion. And of course, he represents so many different things to so many different peoples, but he was a really great man. The other person that I've gone back to really these past 12 months and looked for guidance from afar is obviously you, Chris. I think initially on my own leadership journey, where I was really seeking a change when we first met, it was just meeting you, someone that really saw something in me. And I don't think we get those opportunities that often. And looking back now, it was a really life-changing moment, for which I'm grateful. But really more so in the last sort of 12, 14 months that we've been in this rather different situation for the world. I kind of knew straight away, well, I would be tuning in to what you were saying and how you were going about it, because my way of working here in Brisbane is similar. And really, I have found that the leadership that you've provided in terms of just whether you've realised it or not, sort of kind of mentoring me from afar, just with what I can, because I can read into your words, is really a great form of leadership that's helped inspire me just to kind of contextualise. Okay, yes, what I'm thinking is sort of what I can see is going on, A, in the UK, which is really interesting, but B, it sort of aligns to some of the conversations I've had with you in the past. But you've always challenged me again. I think it can be uncomfortable to have challenging conversations with people, but they're really the best kinds of conversations. And I sort of see myself as somebody that now goes out and has similar sorts of conversations in my role as a coach and a mentor to others. And I feel that without that experience, I wouldn't be the person I am. I certainly don't think I would have had some of the courage that I've had to really demonstrate and hold on to the whole time I've really been running my business, but particularly these last 12 months. So there's a real, for me, in those examples, kind of a really historical, well-known figure, and then just someone that's in my circle that I'm close to, you know. And I think sometimes they're the best people that inspire you on the journey, and I'm sure many people can relate to that.
Oh, thank you, Heather. That's really kind. What's been your greatest learning?
I think my greatest learning of my career is that I'm limitless in the way that I lead and create change, and the way that my mindset works for me in any different circumstance. And where I say that's a learning from where I sit now, we're all limitless. Every human being on the planet has a limitless part of their mindset and their sort of being. And that belief and that understanding of how to tap into being limitless, it can get eroded, and it can get eroded as a leader, for a whole series of different reasons. And the biggest learning is that not only am I limitless, but I can continue to get even more limitless as a leader, as a person, as a professional, as someone that influences others, which is a really, really important facet of future leadership: how you influence, how you connect, how you engage. And it's been a massive, massive journey for me to understand that my mindset has this kind of real potential and limitless soul that's there. And it's really, for me, a journey that has never stopped, and probably will be the journey I'm on for the rest of my life. And the reason I suppose I share that as a learning is because you don't sort of get to the end of that. And when we think about leadership and mindset, a lot of what we have to do is let go of the idea that there's kind of a structured, linear, step-by-step model to make you great. It's actually far more about how you connect with people, how you emotionally influence people. And what that means in your mindset is that you're sort of working within what I call a mindset for choices, and your emotions and your intuition. So I definitely didn't start out understanding that, even probably 5-6 years ago. I'm far more there now. It's what I really, really sort of preach to other people. And I think it's really important as leaders to just kind of ground yourself in that positive elevation, is that you've got this limitless part of you. You might sometimes be fighting with yourself about, how do I make this happen? What do I do here? But there's a way of sort of just being with yourself to reset, to reground, to focus on belief that will continue to make you stronger and even more limitless. But for me, that's been a massive revelation in my life.
Success and failure, how have they impacted on you?
Yeah, and I think, look, I'm not going to give you the list of, the 38 failures that probably have pervaded my life, except that I'm a lesson in failure. And I often say, you win more times in less time, you fail more times in life than you win. Okay, so the failures set you up for the win. And when you win, how sweet is that win? Because you've had the failures, okay? And so, of course, there is failure there. I think my greatest failure, to be honest, as a human, as a leader, as a professional, was over-investing in what I call the work bubble. And that failure had a huge, huge toll professionally and personally on my life. On the other hand, it sort of set me up from where I am now. But I didn't really have a lot of emotional balance or life balance, almost intentionally, in terms of the way I felt I had to operate for many years. And that really was a failure, because I lost sight not only of my values, but in a sense of the value I often bring into who I was. And I think that that created a whole series of roadblocks and limitations that I've worked really hard to overcome, and have done so. My greatest success actually is one that I think is just starting to break through. And you and I have spoken about this a lot, about, we're this close, or we're just breaking through, and sort of I'm right there at the moment. So in a way, what the pandemic did was kind of force a whole lot of change on businesses and people, and I'm no different. And I launched a series online called the Interrupt series, which was a much more informal and less structured program, all about stress for leadership, and sort of how to manage that during very difficult times. And it was a real hit. And then when I got back to my face-to-face events, and where I see my biggest success coming, is that I could almost instantly see that there'd been a much greater buy-in for my messages in the sort of leadership and entrepreneurial community, around how mental health links in with mindset, how well-being is really part of what what needs to happen, how emotions are the work of leadership, not just of something that doesn't affect leaders. And, you know, I see people coming to my events almost repeat now all the time, really quoting back to me the things that I say. I see myself so much now in this role of teaching and influencing for learning. You can't put a price on that, yeah. And that's been such a big success, and it's just right there, and it sort of just gives me a great deal of comfort. And I suppose it comes from the back of everything that has happened to me.
Oh, fair enough. Can you tell me a story about something that's happened to you in your life that's really impacted on how you look at life as a leader?
Yeah, and I love telling this story because it's still really relevant now. But probably the biggest incident or event that happened to me, a really key stage of my leadership development, was that I experienced and lived and led through the global financial crisis, the GFC, and I did so in London. And, you know, that the day the GFC arrived, as I often frame this to my Brisbane audience, so I'm slightly reframing it back to you, is that, you know, I was in London the day that sort of all came crashing onto to our worlds. And, you know, that was not a good day for the world, and for a whole series of different reasons. And I'll unpack it at the sort of professional and the personal level. But I often say, I was working as an editor at that time, as you know, and always out interviewing amazing people, leaders, entrepreneurs, and so on and so forth. And I began to notice in the interviews, probably maybe a short time after the GFC really hit, and I'd have my sort of list of 6 questions or whatever the angle was that I was trying to do. And increasingly, the person on the other side of the table would sort of take me and go, no, Heather, I just want to tell you this story about where I was the day the GFC hit. You know, I was in Bali, I was doing this, and it became this thing where I then learned to sort of expect it. Well, this person's going to want to share whatever the story was. And it was invariably a story of great challenge, but also a lot of some optimism. And I then, years later, when I began to formulate my own vision for Pendulum, all about values-based change and the limitless mindset, of telling this story as this kind of 21st century man on the moon moment. But what I would say, looking back and even now with the pandemic, was the GFC, so this was October 2008, was the day the trust died. And what I mean by that, it was the day the trust died in major institutions of our world, including the workplace, really. And what happened was change sped up. You know, I think we can safely say that was a massive, huge turning point for the issue of change, and the fact that perhaps you could have put your head in the sand and hid from it and pretended it was all going to blow over. But really, this was a turning point, and it's nothing like contextually the pandemic, where literally every single person on the planet's been affected. But it was certainly a massive, huge wake-up call to many people. And since that time, the change really sped up. But more importantly, then we had this kind of societal change where people started to really question institutions. Can I trust this? There was a whole series of kind of great big reality checks. And I often say that was also a time we kind of really woke up and smelt the coffee. And as leaders, we began this journey of managing the external forces of change, ones that are not in control, not knowing what's going to happen, and sort of really questioning how leadership needed to be. And I think it impacted me then. Unbeknownst to me, it really set in path a whole series of personal changes in my life. I moved back to Australia in 2013 after whatever 4 or 5 years of post-GFC kind of work. And then that in turn brought about a whole series of personal changes and life transformations, positive and challenging. But professionally, it really set me on the course for waking up my own need as a leader to, I suppose, be able to be a bit more expressive, to understand that there was this skill called intuition that I'd suppressed for a long time, and I knew a lot of others would be. But more importantly, that I began to understand through the circumstances of life and work coming together since really that time, about how to really mold a mindset that was limitless, that could create change as opposed to expect it to be a linear, put it into boxes. Don't like that expression, but that is what can often be said, this kind of non-linear journey of change. So then we hit the pandemic, and prior to really February, March last year, one of my great assets was that I, as a leader and as an advisor, as a consultant, as a writer, was that I'd been through the GFC in London. That was a huge event for me. It shapes a lot of what I do now, a lot of the way I look at leadership. But when the pandemic then hit, and we're smart people, I could see straight away that, okay, well, not necessarily the full scale of what's actually happened, but I was able to rest in my experiences of the GFC, understanding how my mindset needed to work to then help the leaders and professionals I was working with, and found that they were all rock solid, so all the sort of mantras and the teaching and the way I would sort of work was very much ready for something as devastating as what we're dealing with now. And I've worked hard to keep a positive elevation to all of my work and to inspire others during this time. So I think in a way I'm lucky, I suppose. I had that GFC experience. Gosh, at times that was darn hard work, and a lot of grey hairs on Heather's head got put on in that time, but in a sense it's those events that make you, yeah. And obviously you and I did all that together, so we're remembering a few things there. And look, they were ultimately very exciting times, but it was just probably that first big shock of many people's lives and professional lives where you couldn't really make sense of how you would eventually get back to balancing the books or whatever it might be. So that's a massively big influence on me, and I talk about this all the time at my events. And the GFC, the 21st Century Man in the Movement, the day the trust died.
Oh, brilliant. Final question. What would you say to your 18-year-old self? What advice would you give your 18-year-old self?
I would probably say just spend more time living life, and just try and keep things simple, and just really don't lose sight of your creative self, because the professional journey that I had wasn't probably traditionally seen as creative, but I've learned over the years that we're all creative. That's part of our limitless mind. And I because I overinvested in work, I lost sight of some of the things I'm creatively good at, which in turn helps you be better at work. But just kind of don't rush things, and always keep things real, and always look to really see what needs to be seen, and use a mindset for choices to set really rock solid boundaries for your life. It's all one. It will all be okay. It's okay to choose the path of positive mental elevation, because we need to do that. But, life is short. Yeah, life's short, and just never lose perspective on that. The worst day of your life, the worst thing you can imagine, is rarely what actually is. And actually it's really the nuances that are of life, particularly health, and I think that's a massively important message for everyone, that ultimately will become more dominant in terms of the way you evolve your own leadership and your life.
Brilliant. Thanks, Heather. That's superb.
Thank you.